For nearly 100 years, people have been asking the question, could there be a dinosaur in Scotland?
I am firmly convinced that there is something quite abnormal in the depths of the Loch. It is capable of quite extraordinary speed. It must be of immense proportions.
There was a long neck coming out about 6 feet out of the water, and its head reminded me rather of a horse. The body was about 30 to 40 feet long. I was out rowing in the middle of the loch. Without any warning, the boat started to heave underneath me. It was terrifying. It was the only time I've ever felt frightened on this loch in the whole of my life.
It must have been travelling about 15 knots. The length of the part we saw was about 20 feet. The wake it created caused our boat to rock violently. It was without doubt a living creature.
Loch Ness rips deep across Scotland and contains more fresh water than all the rivers and lakes of the British Isles put together. 23 miles long, 1 mile wide, 900 feet deep, its waters are rich in peat and terribly murky. A few feet down there is a darkness so total that professional scuba divers emerge shaking with fear. It is the perfect hiding place. There have been sightings of strange creatures in Loch Ness for at least 1400 years, since St. Columba sent a beast on its way in 565. But the sightings were by local people who kept themselves to themselves in the crofter's huts and quiet villages around the loch. For centuries, the secret of the loch was a local story. But in 1933, the Loch Ness phenomenon took off. A new road was built around the loch, allowing a clear view of the water, and sightings by excited motorists came in thick and fast. One of the most extraordinary stories was that of an English couple, the Spicers, who were driving by the loch in July when they were confronted by the spectacle of a 30-foot-long undulating creature crossing the road. Mr. Spicer was moved to describe this as a loathsome sight. In a world racked by economic depression, with the spectre of Nazism rising in Europe, this story was the perfect antidote, and it sparked a media frenzy. News crews rushed up to Scotland, and the creature in the loch gained a name.
Crosses on this diagram reveal where it is stated that the monster has been most frequently seen in the past. The arrowheads indicate where it has been seen on the road and shore. And this is the point our cameramen were stationed at when, after a long and arduous vigil, they actually filmed it. For through our telescopic lenses, we saw the grey waters suddenly heave as the monster cut through them with lightning speed.
This unconvincing footage was branded as proof of the monster's existence. Not a day passed without a new angle to the story. Even the Prime Minister, Ramsay MacDonald, was reported to be planning a trip to the loch to see the monster for himself. And this gigantic housing was constructed to put the creature in, should it ever be captured.
You must be near the Great Cave.
Tales told by divers of deep underwater caves in the loch inspired a feature film, shot on location, which recollected some of the stories of the time. The film coincided with the earliest scientific attempts at classification of the creature, which described it as a giant amphibian. Loch Ness quickly became Britain's #1 tourist attraction. There was a real carnival atmosphere as this extraordinary story dominated the headlines. Then, as quickly as it had blown up, the story blew over, precipitated by the bold claims of a big game hunter. What he declared to be the footprints of the monster itself turned out to be caused by nothing more mysterious than an umbrella stand. But if the attention of the world's press was diverted by dark rumblings abroad, the sightings of the Loch Ness monster have continued right to this day. A body of photographs has built up, many taken by respectable men and women. One of the most striking was taken by a bank manager, Mr. McNabb, as he was about to take a snapshot of Castle Urquhart in 1955.
There was a calm, warm, hazy afternoon when my attention was held by a movement in the calm water over to the left. Some black or dark enormous water creature was cruising on the surface.
Some of the best pictures are inevitably faked. The most famous of all Nessie images is known as the surgeon's photograph because it was taken by an eminently reputable doctor and army colonel. This is the archetypal image of Nessie embedded in most people's minds, what seems to be a long-necked dinosaur. Unfortunately, 50 years on, the surgeon has proved unreliable. The true scale of this monster is evident when we see the whole picture. The best photograph of Nessie is actually a model mounted on a toy submarine from Woolworths. Adrian Shine has been involved in scientific research at the Loch for the last 20 years, and his view of the photographic evidence is that it's undermined by its very lack of consistency.
It's interesting that these classic pictures, they're all different, and so to an investigator they are actually quite fruitless in that they are all different. They can't obviously all be, real pictures of the same animal. And there's no real point in arguing about whether any of them are genuine, because there is substantial evidence that the best-known pictures are manipulated. The surgeon's photograph is one. The original negative of the McNabb picture has disappeared. There are suggestions that it's a process of rephotography of some description. The Lachlan Stewart picture of the angular humps turned out to be tarpaulin-covered hay bales.
For the skeptic, only filmed evidence might convince. In 1960, an aeronautical engineer by the name of Tim Dinsdale came to the loch armed with a cine camera, not on a whim, but as part of a methodical, thought-out strategy. On April the 23rd, on the last day of his stay at the loch, he was driving back to his hotel when he saw something in the water. Somehow managing to remain calm, he then shot this extraordinary film.
I knew Tim Dinsdale quite well, and I would say that he was a man of absolute integrity. He believed absolutely that in 1960, on his first visit to Loch Ness, he did film part of a large animal. Now remember that he studied this object through binoculars before he then filmed it with his 16mm film camera. And he described it, I think, as resembling the back of a cow or a buffalo or something such as that.
He looked at the object first through binoculars, and what he saw was a sort of a triangular hump. And if you look at a rowing boat from the stern, that is what you see from height, because the bow is obviously pointed, and you're looking along the rowing boat from the stern. And the helmsman himself, for example, any figure in the boat would blend with that image.
I've hundreds of times looked at objects on Loch Ness through binoculars, and you can tell if it's a boat. And with those 8 or 10 times magnification binoculars, one must suppose that he would have been able to distinguish between a boat, a 14-foot boat with people in it, which would be quite a recognizable and identifiable shape through binoculars, and what he saw and what he described. And having seen it, he then, of course, filmed it. And he filmed it going across the loch, and, of course, filmed it starting to submerge. Well, it's unlikely to have been a boat.
Dinsdale's film in 1960 sparked a new interest in the Loch Ness monster, and an official organisation, the Loch Ness Investigation Bureau, was formed, dedicated to discovering the truth. Throughout the 60s, enthusiastic amateurs, armed with cameras and long telephoto lenses, set out to secure conclusive proof of some unidentified creature in Loch Ness. But although the sightings continued unabated, In 10 years, nobody was to film any evidence as convincing as Dinsdale's right at the start of the decade. Surface photography had failed, so in the 1970s, the cameras went underwater. Adrian Shine led the way, testing a system in a nearby loch with clearer waters than Loch Ness. He endeavored to film any creature silhouetted against the surface. But for the murky waters of Loch Ness, an American scientist, Dr. Robert Rines, brought state-of-the-art underwater cameras married to a sonar system. The equipment was set up in the waters near Urquhart Bay, one of the deepest parts of Loch Ness, and the results seemed extraordinary.
We submitted this to what we might say is an international jury of sonar experts and optical experts and photographic experts. And their unanimous agreement among the sonar people is that we did in fact detect large moving objects that seem to be from 20 to 30 feet long, seem to have an appendage that carries with the body of about 10 feet, and from the sonar signature indicates that they have humps or projections spaced about 6 feet apart. Here's a picture in color, true color, of the way it ordinarily looks, all that silt, and we get all this haze and fuzz. But fortunately, we did get something that looks very much like the tail of a newt, we are told, but very much larger, that's 8 feet long, that came into the camera. And our best picture, improved by enhancement, was of a flipper in a frame that was taken some 30 seconds earlier. And here you do see an appendage that the optical experts tell us is some 8 feet long and about 2 feet wide, and it coincided exactly with a 10-foot measurement on the sonar.
The extent to which these pictures were enhanced or retouched for magazine publication is now a matter of some controversy. The flipper shot does seem to mirror the popular image of a Loch Ness dinosaur. But it may be that these pictures show nothing more than the bottom of the loch. The gargoyle head could easily be an outcrop of rock, and the long head and neck might well be a submerged tree. For scientists to accept the existence of a large, unexplained creature in Loch Ness, sonar continues to be the best option. Trying to photograph anything clearly in the brown waters is out of the question. If a large anomaly could be repeatedly caught on sonar, then the basic scientific requirement of proving an assertion by repeating a result could be satisfied. It was this faith in sonar which brought about Operation Deep Scan in 1987.
Operation Deep Scan was a sort of a sonar curtain exercise involving a line of boats, each with an echo sounder, a very simple sonar, deliberately designed to be simple but large. Simple because it was necessary to send the beams straight down so that they weren't bent by thermal layers. We needed to know whether any of the previously gained sonar contacts were tethered debris, junk thrown overboard from trawlers, floats on bits of rope, that sort of thing. A lot of the contacts turned out to be just that. A lot of the contacts, when we revisited the locations, turned out to be fixed. There were 3 contacts that came out of Deep Scan that we couldn't explain in that way.
These anomalies were described by sonar engineer Darrell Lawrence as being animate objects smaller than a whale but larger than a shark. But again, the deep waters gave away none of their secrets. Until now, there has been a distinct scarcity of professional scientists at the loch investigating this greatest of mysteries. But in 1990, Nicholas Witchell spearheaded Project Urquhart, the first comprehensive program of scientific research at Loch Ness. Carrying the most sophisticated testing and monitoring equipment, they set out to scan the loch. Drawing together scientists from the Freshwater Biological Association and the Natural History Museum, Project Urquhart started to investigate how Loch Ness functions and what life it contains. For the first time, the largest body of fresh water in Britain was under the scrutiny of leading scientists.
The scientists are building up a picture of the food chain in the loch, and it will eventually be possible to say whether there are anomalies in that food chain. They can work out what is the theoretical fish population of Loch Ness based on the amount of plankton in the water. They can also determine, after careful study, what is the actual fish population of Loch Ness. If there is a discrepancy between the two, that would suggest that there is an anomaly in the food chain. It would suggest that there is something grazing on those fish.
At 7 p.m. on the 28th of July, Project Urquhart research vessel was travelling between Foyers and Fort Augustus. Behind the boat, at a depth of 20 meters, the submarine tracking sonar was in operation. Meanwhile, in the sonar room, Tor Edland was on duty when a large contact was picked up. It was so strong that it registered red on the sonar. It was tracked for 2 minutes. Then it disappeared.
There have been a number of unexplained sonar contacts in Loch Ness. Now, because Loch Ness is a very narrow basin, it is undoubtedly quite possible that some of these sonar contacts have been caused by wave formations or reverberations from the side walls of the loch. I say this with some hesitation because I am not clearly an electronics or a sonar expert, but all I can do is quote people who are electronics and sonar experts who have studied some of the contacts that have been obtained in Loch Ness, and they say that these are not false echoes. They are not, they say, echoes that could have been obtained, for example, from a shoal of fish, that they would appear to be echoes characteristic of echoes obtained from large underwater animate objects.
So, if there is a predator in the waters of the loch, what could it possibly be? Whatever it is, it's difficult to see how it could be any sort of dinosaur, since the whole loch was frozen over in the last ice age. Anything that lives here now must have come in the last 10,000 years. Known creatures in the loch have almost exclusively migrated from the sea. Reptiles could not survive in the cold waters. Mammals would need to come to the surface to breed, and so would be seen far more frequently. And there are no known marine amphibians that could have come from the sea. But what about fish?
There is a fish, interestingly enough, evolved in early Jurassic times, which is the sturgeon. In our case, the Baltic sturgeon. It's a very rare visitor to the British Isles. It comes into fresh water to spawn. And it wouldn't feed in fresh water. You see, the food resources in Loch Ness are so low, but it wouldn't have to deplete them. And sturgeon are very primitive-looking things, bony plates on the back, dorsal fin right back towards the tail, so you wouldn't recognize it as a fish. It's an upturned snout, if you want to perceive that as being perhaps seen as a long head and neck. It would come into the loch once in a blue moon, if you like. It wouldn't find a mate, and then it would go away again. And so, at the moment, today, that is my solution to what has happened here.
Is this really the face of the Loch Ness monster? The popular image remains that of a dinosaur with a long neck and a humped back. So where did this come from? Sailors have always reported sea serpents, dragons, and other monsters. Are we predisposed to seeing these particular shapes amid the confusion of light on water?
We have stood beside eyewitnesses and we have contrived events. And then we've asked the witness to describe, remember, recall, and draw what he may have seen. What is interesting is that actually there is a considerable difference, quite often, between what is actually out there on the water and what the observer draws. And that is simply due to the mechanisms of perception. Nobody comes here without some sort of a stereotype in their mind of what they are likely to see. And if they see something they do not understand, then that will begin in their perception to form into one of the well-known stereotypes.
I think there's no doubt that a large proportion of the people who believe that they have seen something unknown in Loch Ness are mistaken. It is quite easy to be confused by wave patterns and by commonplace objects in the loch, especially if you are looking out with great enthusiasm and half expecting to see something unusual. But I have, over 20 years, spoken and interviewed scores of people at Loch Ness who believe they have seen something unusual. And even if you discount 70, 80, even 90% of them as perhaps having been mistaken, you are still left with this body of eyewitness testimony, which I believe it is very arrogant to dismiss as unreliable, because having sat there, looked at those people straight in the eye and heard from their lips what they have seen, I would maintain that it is impossible to explain away some of the eyewitness testimony in terms of commonplace objects, in terms of dishonesty, in terms of people having been mistaken. And it is that eyewitness testimony which always, even when I'm feeling most cynical and suspicious about the whole Loch Ness thing, makes me just continue to wonder